Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. So today we are going to start our discussion on ecology, and we're really going to start here by just looking at the big picture. How do we talk about the Earth as a whole, specifically about how life fits into that? So if we're talking about ecology, what do we mean by that? Well, if we break that word down, right, eco, sort of house or abode, and ology, the study of. So when we look at the term ecology, we're talking about how we study this house, this earth, this thing that we live in and live on. And really, it's going to be driven by the interactions between organisms and their environment. So, what sort of environmental factors are going on around those organisms, and how do those organisms influence that environment, and how does it then backtrack and influence them? And so, when we look at ecology and we study those interactions, there's a lot of other underlying components to what we've been talking about all year that really play into this evolution, genetics, gene expression, all of this stuff really are the molecular underpinnings to those interactions between those organisms and their environment. And so we're sort of zooming back out and looking at how all of this works on a grander scale from the point of ecology. So it really is the science of relationships. So, if we're going to talk about those relationships between organisms and their environment, then what do we mean when we talk about their environment? And so, the environment really is made up of two major factors: your biotic factors, so all of those living things, the organisms that are inhabiting Earth, the plants, the animals, the fungi, the bacteria, as well as anything that used to once be living, so waste products from organisms, the organisms themselves once they die. All of that still is considered biotic components to the environment, as opposed to the abiotic or the non-living components, so things like temperature, um, compounds, and elements in the soil, light coming in from the sun, moisture, air currents, and so forth. So all of these things are going to have influences on the way organisms respond to their environment and to each other. So, just like when we look at an individual organism and we talk about those hierarchical structures of cells to tissues to organs, organ systems, and ultimately to the organism, we've got additional levels of organization that fit within ecology itself, sort of starting down at that organism and then working our way up to be more and more and more inclusive of bigger and bigger things. So your biosphere here really is the big all-encompassing component of Earth itself, and as it relates to the living organisms here, the life on Earth. Drive that down into individual biomes, then down into individual ecosystems, communities, populations, and then down to those organisms. And then we can start getting into things like the cell structure and genetics and gene expression and all of that suborganismal level, going down to those organ systems and tissues and cells themselves, down to your DNA. So when we talk about your biosphere, this is life supporting portions of Earth. So it's going to compose or at least interact with the air, the land, water. It is your highest level of organization. It is the globe as a whole. That being said, we can talk about the biosphere as just being one of Earth's four major interconnected systems. So your hydrosphere would be water and ice, water vapor. So we talk about humidity and um, water cycles and all that. That's sort of more the hydrosphere, your atmosphere being the air. So air currents, pollution, we could talk about as part of that atmosphere. And then your geosphere being continents, the rocks, the seafloor, that kind of thing. That being said, we're talking about all of these interconnected systems. So just like your body has a circulatory system and a respiratory system and a nervous system, all of which have their own subcomponents to them, your brain, your heart, your lungs. Um, all of those systems, though, need to work and function appropriately together so that you as an organism are healthy and living. So when we look at Earth as a whole, although we're going to break it down and we're going to focus mostly on that biosphere component to this, we are sort of remiss to not mention the fact that there are all these other systems that are working as part of Earth as a whole. If you take that analogy from organism up to Earth, and we need all of these systems and these spheres to be functionally healthy, to have a globe that is functioning appropriately. At any point when we talk about things like pollution, which might be more tied to the atmosphere, that definitely may come from life itself. Humans are very good at creating pollution, but that's going to have ramifications to how that atmosphere functions in terms of weather patterns, which then drives the hydrosphere. And are we getting acid rain downstream of where that factory is pumping up pollution into the atmosphere, which then might have changes to the life that lives downstream, which may have impacts on land as well. So, like, all of this stuff is very, very much interconnected. You can't really talk about affecting one sphere without affecting others. And so, as a result, we have to take care of all of these spheres and understand that they are all interconnected so that Earth as a whole can be a healthy, functional planet for us to continue living here on. Okay, so if biosphere is the Earth as a whole, how do we start divvying that up to give us some ways to start talking about different places? And so we talk about biomes, and these are sort of the next level below that. And they are major regional or global communities of organisms, and they are not only characterized by the life that lives there, but also by the climate. And so we look at long-term weather patterns in these areas, as well as maybe some of the geographic conditions, geographic features, as well as the life that lives there. Predominantly, we tend to focus on that life as plant communities because they're the ones that can't get up and move. But we can certainly talk about some major animals that live there as well if we chose to. But they're typically characterized both by that climate and by their plants. So we talk about things like tropical rainforests, savannas, deserts, tundras, and we'll go through in a later video a little bit more about the characteristics of some of these major biomes. But if you look, we take a look at biomes and we've got tropical savannas, or excuse me, tropical rainforests, I should say, in South America, Central America, Africa, in parts of Asia. So when we talk about biomes, we're talking about those tropical rainforests or those savannas or those deserts collectively across the entire globe. We can then drive down into individual ecosystems. Now, why I mention the terminology here, when we talk about biomes, we talk about something like a desert or a tropical rainforest. We're talking about them globally. When we drive into ecosystems, I may still talk about a tropical rainforest ecosystem, but now I'm going to talk specifically about, say, the Amazon rainforest or the Sahara Desert, right, as an ecosystem. So I'm going to drive in and be a little more specific. So when I talk biomes, right, it's global tropical savannas, global deserts. But when I drive into an ecosystem idea, I might talk specifically about the desert here, or the desert here, or the desert here, as an individual ecosystem. So ecosystems, by definition, include all the organisms, so all the biotic stuff, all the life, as well as all the abiotic factors in which those organisms interact. So the sun, the climate, the soil conditions, all of that abiotic stuff is also included here within those ecosystems, um, in terms of the fish or the coral or the plants that might live in that particular ecosystem. So when we talk about ecosystems, we'll split them out into two major groups, and then we can talk subcategories from there. So we're either talking a marine ecosystem or a terrestrial ecosystem, terrestrial meaning on land, and then we can start being more specific below that. So talking about a specific terrestrial ecosystem by talking about the deserts of the Southwest US, that kind of thing. Communities then are going to fit within those ecosystems, and these are several interacting groups of different species. So they are very, very much interdependent on each other. When we talk about communities, really we're taking that ecosystem and now we're just focusing on the biotic stuff. Um, so interacting communities like the grizzly bear and the salmon here in the picture, right? They are two different species. They are inhabiting the same environment. They are definitely interdependent on each other in terms of food sources for that bear, prey species for that bear. And so they are interacting and interdependent. Populations, then, these are groups of organisms of one species, again, living in the same place at the same time, and they interbreed and compete with each other for resources. So we spend a lot of time really drilling into this idea of a population when we talk about evolution. So it's the same species, same place, same time, and they have to be able to interbreed with each other. So they are then competing for similar resources, the foods that they eat, the mates that they may wish to reproduce with, the shelter that they may inhabit. Keep in mind that population level is here where we start talking about being able to evolve or not evolve in that case. So populations evolve, populations can go extinct. The organism, however, is either capable of surviving or dying. So an organism is any organism or any living thing that exhibits all of those characteristics of life that we talked about at the beginning of the school year. So response to stimuli contains things like DNA and carbon-based molecules, can survive and as a result contribute to the evolution of its population. Those sorts of ideas. They can be unicellular, so single-celled organisms like bacteria or amoebas, or they can be the multicellular organisms that most kids think about when we talk about things like the salmon or the bear, or you for that matter. This is the lowest level of organization that ecology will deal with directly. That being said, just like any living thing, it is subject to underlying understanding of things like genetics, like metabolism. All of that stuff is still there. But generally, when we talk about ecologists, they're studying it at the organism level as opposed to really driving into the molecular levels that we've been talking about up to this point. So they may understand genetics, they may understand that DNA exists, but they're generally not driving down into individual alleles or looking at individual base pairs when they're studying their ecology, although it may come up depending on what kind of questions and studies that they're conducting, but it's usually not what their driving force is behind their understanding of how life is working because they're looking at a much more macroscopic or big picture level of life.